I was born in Nkrumah in 1909. I grew up in Gold Coast towns. I saw a colony ruled for profit. I learned in local schools at Akamoda College. I taught in the Gold Coast, later studied in the United States and Britain. While abroad, I read widely about economics and politics. I met Pan-Africanists who shared a vision for a continent free from foreign control. I saw how our raw materials left our shores, how our people stayed poor. This experience shaped one big idea in me. I came to believe that true freedom for our people rested on industrial sovereignty. Without it, political independence would remain an empty promise. This is Africa unrestricted. Nkrumah saw a structural condition. Our economies were built to export raw goods. The first structural condition was a thin regional market. Private investors. Local private investors, foreign often argued that local demand was simply too small to justify large-scale industrial investment. They saw greater and safer returns elsewhere. Colonial-era laws had protected foreign trading firms, not to nurture local manufacturers. Local capital was scarce, with few individuals or private groups having resources for major industrial projects. This created a powerful inertia. The private sector, left to its own devices, was unlikely to build the industrial base. The new nation needed economic independence. Nkrumah and his planners saw a clear structural barrier to private-led industrialization. Waiting for private capital could mean waiting forever. It meant continued dependence on foreign markets and foreign corporations for finished goods. He chose public finance state-owned companies. He leveraged the state bank and development funds to provide loans and direct investment. The government set up the Volta River project in 1957, a monumental plan, a dam for hydroelectric power for an aluminum smelter. The next structural condition was market size. Most individual African colonies, upon gaining independence, had relatively small domestic markets. Modern manufacturing, however, often depends on economies of scale. Producing goods for a small population can be inefficient and costly. Nkrumah looked at the map of Africa and saw a continent of small, disconnected markets. These markets were split by colonial borders drawn with little regard for economic logic. He saw that fragmentation as a major structural cost and a self-imposed weakness. He pushed for regional integration on an unprecedented scale. He became a vocal champion for political union and close economic cooperation. He argued a united Africa would be a vast single market supporting large-scale industries. He was a key figure in forming the Organization of African Unity in 1963. He promoted stronger trade links among newly independent states. He envisioned shared industrial projects, a steel mill. He envisioned shared industrial projects, a vehicle assembly plant. His advocacy drew greater political attention to Pan-African markets. Economic unity entered mainstream post-colonial discourse, but practical barriers proved immense. Non-convertible currencies, political rivalries between new leaders. Many ambitious regional projects stalled for lack of funding or political will. Another critical condition was the state of the civil service after independence. The colonial administration had been designed for a limited purpose: to maintain law and order, facilitate resource extraction. It was not built to manage a complex, modern industrial economy. As a result, the new state inherited a small administrative apparatus. There were very few Ghanaians who had been trained as industrial managers, engineers, high-level economic planners. Nkrumah saw this administrative weakness as a key constraint on his ambitions. Without capable people to run the new systems, the plans would remain just paper. A major structural constraint was the availability of capital. Domestic savings in Ghana, as in most post-colonial economies, were very low. This meant that large-scale industrial projects had to be financed from external sources. However, foreign capital always came with conditions. International financial institutions like the World Bank, as well as private Western companies, demanded a return and often insisted on control over funded projects. That created a tough situation for a leader guarding newly won sovereignty. Nkrumah saw this as a core post-colonial dilemma. The choice was stark: borrow from foreign powers and accept the dependencies, or underfund development and risk failing the people. He navigated this by pursuing diversified funding and strategic negotiation. He sought loans and technical partnerships from many international partners, Western nations and Eastern Bloc countries. It was part of his policy of non-alignment, playing sides to expand policy space. Sometimes he nationalized foreign assets he judged exploitative. The next structural condition was technological dependence. In the 1960s, most modern industrial technology was designed and owned in Europe and North America. Local firms in Ghana did not hold patents, did not own complex machine designs, or possess deep institutional knowledge for advanced manufacturing. Technology was not just a set of machines, it was a form of power. Nkrumah understood this clearly. He saw that simply buying factories from abroad was not enough. He thought knowing how to design, build, and improve factories mattered as much as owning the machines. The state must actively invest in technological learning and adaptation, not just formal education but a culture of industrial know-how. His government promoted joint ventures with foreign firms explicitly to train Ghanaian engineers and managers. He invited technicians and industrial experts to operate the plants and to teach their local counterparts. He pushed for technology transfer clauses in new project contracts. The goal: move from passive users of foreign tech to active participants in the technological process. The physical infrastructure of the Gold Coast had been shaped by colonial priorities. Railways were built to link resources to ports. Roads were likewise oriented to exports. Mines, cocoa farms, coastal ports for export. Large parts of the country, especially the north, had little modern infrastructure. Industry, however, has different needs: reliable and affordable power, extensive transport networks for inputs and finished goods, access to water. Nkrumah and his planners saw geography as a constraint on factory locations and on how factories could operate efficiently. He decided the state must invest massively in large-scale infrastructure to reshape the country's economic geography, create conditions for industrialization beyond colonial corridors. The Akosombo Dam on the Volta River is the most famous example, a planned powerhouse for Ghana's industrial revolution. Its primary purpose: supply cheap, abundant electricity for an American-owned aluminum smelter. That smelter would process Ghana's bauxite reserves. It was also meant to power other industries and to supply cities across the country. The drive created new industrial sites. A defining condition of the Ghanaian economy at independence was its reliance on imported finished goods. Everything from textiles, canned food, cars, machinery was brought in from abroad. This constant outflow of money to pay for imports drained the country's precious foreign exchange reserves. Those reserves were earned primarily from cocoa exports. Local producers just starting out found it almost impossible to compete with large-scale, cheaper imported goods. Nkrumah saw this as a structural trap that reinforced dependency and stifled domestic industry. He tackled it by adopting import substitution industrialization. It was a common strategy across many developing countries then. The government imposed high tariffs and strict quotas on many imported consumer goods. The goal: make imports more expensive and scarce and create protected space for Ghanaian industries to grow. To encourage local production, the government offered generous contracts, tax breaks, subsidies, and pushed new state-owned enterprises nationwide. The policies led to growth in certain manufacturing sectors. Ghana began producing more basic consumer goods: textiles, soap, matches, building materials like cement. The political environment of a newly independent nation is a structural condition in itself. Political survival pressures inevitably shape economic policy choices. Nkrumah, as the leader of the independence movement, faced immense public expectations. The people had been promised that freedom would bring prosperity, jobs, a better standard of living. He knew that maintaining public support was crucial for his government's stability and the continuity of his long-term vision. He interpreted this political pressure as a structural factor to steer industrial policy. He decided to prioritize large, visible projects that could deliver jobs and serve as symbols of national pride and progress. National factories, a national airline, monumental infrastructure, the Akosombo Dam. These projects were not just economic calculations. They were part of a nation-building narrative. They showed the world that an independent African nation could achieve great things. The opening of a new factory in a provincial town was a major political event. The immediate consequence was strong, widespread public support. The population mobilized behind a vision of a modern, industrial Ghana. However, this centralization of power had drawbacks. Concentration in the executive reduced space for open debate and independent oversight. Some projects moved forward for prestige more than for economic viability. Pressure to deliver quickly sometimes overrode careful planning and fiscal discipline. The context in which Nkrumah acted was specific to his time. He was a leader in the late 1950s and early 1960s, a unique moment in global history. The Cold War created both opportunities and dangers, shaping the flow of finance and political alliances. The institutional structures of colonialism were still fresh and had to be actively dismantled. The global consensus around development economics favored large-scale, state-led planning. The sheer ambition of projects like the Volta Dam fit the spirit of that era. New nations wanted to make a bold statement on the world stage. Some of the choices he made sense then, but might not make sense now. However, many of the lessons from his industrial playbook are transferable to our current challenges. First, he was right that industry is a structural source of sovereignty. The ability to control production, add value to raw materials, develop technical skills. Second, he demonstrated that the state can and sometimes must play a catalytic role, starting industries and building infrastructure where private markets fail to act. Third, his story shows that building institutions and building human capacity is just as important, if not more so, than building the physical factories themselves. Fourth, his emphasis on regional markets remains profoundly relevant. Scale is critical. Finally, he showed that the way development is financed must be designed to preserve, not compromise, policy autonomy. There are also clear lessons about what should not be repeated. We should not maintain industrial protection indefinitely, as it can lead to inefficiency and high costs. We should not let state ownership become a substitute for rigorous management and public accountability. We must not assume that very large projects will always deliver proportional benefits without strong governance and a clear-eyed assessment of their social and environmental costs. Africa Unrestricted.